America, not just African Americans, but Americans across the board.
I think that in large measure, the whole idea, I think the election of 2004 really gave insight to that as well. A person such as Kerry, who was a thinker, or a person who, you know, considered things, was considered a flip-flopper, as opposed to someone who was decisive, such as Bush, who made decisions. They could be wrong decisions. Wow. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to be challenged. But the whole idea of anti-intellectualism is not anything new to America or to the black community.
But did you disagree with what Lisa said about kids don't think it's cool to be smart?
There have been studies done, and I think that there was one done by a professor in North Carolina who actually studied it. And his studies found that, in fact, black children were not chastised more for being intellectual. I have to say, I have two daughters who have been perceived as intellectual. When we lived in the black community, they would have their uniforms on, they would walk past the drug dealers, and my daughter told me this story, and they would be encouraging to my daughter. Wow. So I don't think that
I have to say this, Lynn.
No, because I remember when I went to Girls High here in Philadelphia, in the black community, even then, I was not chastised, I was encouraged. So I would challenge that all black children who want to be intellectual are put down in the black community.
But Lisa's in the trenches, right? Are you there talking to these kids?
It's not all. We keep saying this word all. I'm never saying all.
Sure.
One black person that does it is one too many for me. I live there. Let me just see if you can dissect this sentence, Lynn. Here's a sentence. Yo, dog, let me holler at you for a minute. Me and my dudes was smoking some bogeys, and this chick walked up and started wilding. I was like, yo, I ain't beat, fall back. Man, old girl was burnt. What does that mean, Lynn? I can interpret this. What does that mean?
Wait, I can get this.
Why kids talk like that?
But the conversation today is about what blacks need to do to bring themselves up. I'm not trying to mimic. I'm trying to talk about African American people and young kids educating themselves because we are behind.
I don't know if that's a fair assessment. I don't know if that's a fair assessment by you reading that, because I certainly
kids talk to me like this every single day.
I'm in the trenches, and at the University of Penn. I'm in the trenches, and at the University of Penn, the black men at Penn, we deal with kids in the inner city schools around racial identity, racial socialization, and academic achievement. And we have kids who can quote Du Bois. We have kids who can quote Paul Robeson.
Exactly.
We have kids who can tell you about Cornel West. We have kids that can sit and tell you about James Weldon Johnson.
There's a little bit of everybody
out
there.
And so,
we agree with that.
Kids who are resilient. I think one of the things that we have, for instance, we were able to take poems that Tupac had and show the positive aspects of Tupac. He has a poem where he talks about concrete and how a rose grew through the concrete, and we asked young inner city kids from Philadelphia, what is that interpretation? And to hear them say, hey, Mr. Chad, it means that my mom is on crack. It means that I'll have no dad, but I'm still resilient, and I can be like that rose that grows through concrete. We all know that a rose doesn't grow through concrete, but the reality is that kids have an innate ability to overcome some of the obstacles that they're going through, and those obstacles morph into being opportunities. And so sitting here, just 1 minute, just sitting here and being able to read that doesn't show anything other than that that's a person who is into hip-hop culture. And I have some problems with that in a sense. Let's structure that and say, hi, what does that mean to you, and how can you put a different interpretation on that?
Having been in education for approximately 15 years, I can reflect back on what Kawanja Kanjufu wrote in his books,
Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, volumes 1 through 4.
Where he talked about our young children are faced with the dilemma to be cool or to be smart.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's not exclusive to black kids. I mean, every kid that comes up has that problem.
However, the issue is when you have high rates of dropout among African American teens as opposed to white teens, of course, then you can draw some correlation between the peer pressure to be cool versus being smart, versus graduating from high school, versus going to college, something that should be ingrained in you from primary education.
And I agree with that. You're
and the
absolutely
family
right.
structure. But this goes back to what Kanjufu wrote about. This is nothing new. There is that peer pressure that is systemic in our community.
A lot of black people speak two languages. I speak the King's English, and I also speak Ebonics because I have to live in the inner city. I walk through inner cities, so I understand that sentence because I speak Ebonics, but I know the difference between when I'm using it for impact, when I need to use it to talk to young people, and when I'm in an interview. A lot of these kids think that the whole world understands that sentence.
Well, and you're not saying all, you're just saying
I'm never saying all. I said that from the beginning. A lot is too many people. And they don't want to turn that switch on and off.
What I'm suggesting is that
they have not mastered the English language.
That our children need to learn. They need to learn Spanish. They need to learn French. They need to learn Mandingo. They need to learn know Ebonics and English. So what I'm saying, even what you're saying, is not enough.
Mastered. See, when you have a child. When you have a home that speaks two languages, English and Spanish, the main language they teach their child first so they can master that main language and give them the secondary language. In the African-American world, our main language is English. They have not mastered that to join in with the Ebonics. Learn the King's English first, and then as you get older, you can be able to develop more languages.
All communities that
but
don't know
today's
that
about
King's
black
English.
relations.
Is it? And I understand
not
that. Didn't President Bush say the decider? I mean, so let's not put, let's not stress so much that we have to be perfect. And I'm not saying perfect, and nobody's saying perfection, but what I'm saying to you is that that language is also a cultural language within the youth.
Because
it's perfectly fine because it's used properly.
And you're absolutely right in the sense that we're saying, we're talking about the African American community, but then there'll be some others who would say, hey, listen, we need to speak Swahili. Or we need to speak our African tongue.
At the right time and place.
I would simply say that growing up in North Philadelphia, being 6'5", and not being able to play a lick of basketball, I was teased a lot. But I think, like you had articulated earlier, that it went back to the home, and the home, the family structure, it has been broken down. Absolutely. But the family is the first unit of socialization. So was my mother telling me, hey, son, you know what? Put something up in your head because you can hurt your knee, you can blow out your knee, you can twist your ankle, or you can break a leg. What are you going to do? What are you going to have to fall back on? But she still sent me to John Chaney and Sunny Hills basketball camp because it was the bridging of the gap with academics and athletics. But the larger picture was to keep me off of the streets of North Philadelphia because there was a lot of gun violence. And so I would agree that sometimes in the African American community, a lot of the challenges are around people thinking that you shouldn't be educated versus you think you're cute or you think you're smart that you're going to school. But I think that becomes an identity thing because Kunjufu also talked about young black boys who raise their hand because they're eager and they want to answer the question, and teachers, white teachers, labeling them, putting them on Ritalin, saying that they're ADHD and that they're uncontrollable, and here it is, it's just a vibrant kid who knows the answer and he's excited. And so I think we have to look at the full scope of what we're talking about here.
Does the family unit, regardless of what it's comprised of, need to put the emphasis, Antoine, on education from the very beginning, from the time that these kids are born, regardless of where they're born, but does the emphasis need to be on getting an education?
As was just mentioned, the family is the first place of socialization for a child. So I would agree with that comment. Education has to start from the minute you're able to recognize colors, from the minute you're able to produce a sound, whether it's listening to music, even though the Mozart effect has been disproven. Education has to start when you're able to recognize sounds and symbols.
Well, then I'm going to have to point out a statistic that we found when we were researching for this show, that so many young African-American girls, and I say girls because they're 15, 16 years old, are having babies who haven't quite yet been educated themselves.
Please say this one? I must say this. A few years back, I'm passionate. Please. I know I'm on the show a lot. Several years ago, if you remember, there was a young lady who was from the Newark area who was in a stolen car with a bunch of boys. She was 14 or 15 and pregnant during a school night, riding around in a stolen car. Of course, there was a car chase by the police. They shot up in the car and the girl got murdered. My heart broke. Wow. But my question said, where was your mother when you were 2? Where was your mother when you were 12? Where was your mother now when you get 18? The mother was on the news screaming, my baby's good, your baby's not good, she's bad. But the mother herself must have been in the street. The mother must have been in the street. Why wasn't the girl in the bed at night? And why was she 14 pregnant?
I have to take a break. We're going to come back and we're going to ask why so many people, we're going to ask why so many young people are having babies so early in life and what we can do about it. Stay with us.
For more discussion on tonight's topic, please join Arthur Fennell when he hosts a special town hall meeting with entertainer Bill Cosby, Friday night at 9, right here on CN8.